Welcome back. Picking up right off at the tail end of the last episode, my two entire oh god not the beehive kilns have just finished up the mock-yes quantity of fire brick I inserted into them, and after generously contributing an unhealthy amount of lit gunpowder into the butt end of a quartz vein, I once again have all the stuff I need to resume construction on my definitely not compensating for anything compensation construction project. You know, that is, after I finish individually loading up every single one of the bloomeries with stuff, because I still have to do that part by hand, and there is no other way around it. If nothing else, all of that coal mining I did last episode helped speed the process up a bit, since there really isn't much else I can do with it other than smelt things unless I spontaneously develop the urge to construct enough explosives to level a small mountain range. Not, mind you, that I particularly dislike the idea, it's just that I can't think of any reason to do it yet. Meanwhile, it's time to revisit my desiccation destination, my genuine homebrew putrefaction partnership, or if you will, the rot repository, otherwise known as the giant pile of barrels that I compulsively built generically attractive infrastructure around for reasons entirely based off of a hallucinatory set of aesthetic standards that I am in no way obligated to conform to. TLDR, we have a lot of rot, and even more compost, and are very quickly reaching the point where compost is no longer going to be the bottleneck for terra preta production, and will instead pass the baton on to my bone barrels while supplies last. Berries, bread, and a complete disrespect for the nitrogen cycle goes hard. Who would have thought? Now, this does raise something of an interesting issue in that I still, to date, have not encountered so much of a whiff of rich soil, which, while not essential for the production of industrial amounts of TP, is very much recommended. I also, as it so happens, need a flabbergastingly excessive amount of flax seeds infused directly into my rectum if I am to ever have a hope of getting enough flax for my windmills, and once you add on my ever-expanding demands for frankly unhealthy amounts of flint, I find myself in a situation where truly the most productive thing that I can do with myself is run around in circles as far south as possible looking for cool bits of dirt. Rich soil supposedly preferentially spawns in warmer climates with high rainfall, flint spawns everywhere, and flax seems to mostly also spawn everywhere, so there's really nothing for it. Go south. Life is, if not peaceful, then at least marginally more productive there. Since I am going to be roughly in the area, while on my travels, I stopped to take a look at the location that the treasure hunter marked on my map all those months ago. First off, let me just say, either this guy is lying about his sources, or he is seriously getting around the place, because otherwise I have no idea how he managed to find the 6 exposed blocks of ashlar granite in the middle of an enormous impassable mountain range buried under a tree in the middle of a ravine that can only be traversed with ladder spam. But we'll just chalk that up to the same exotic NPC energy that lets testificates pop out iron golems with the power of sleep deprivation and high blood pressure and move on with our lives. At first glance, this place looks just like most of the other ancient set-piece things that I've found littering the caves, albeit with a big hole in the middle and some unique items that I haven't run across before. Alright, neat. Let's go down the hole. The first sign that something isn't quite what it appears to be beyond the giant pit into the depths of the earth is an ominous-looking message that plays whenever I try to build anything, saying that I am disallowed due to it being protected by a higher power. For those less fluent in gamer speak, this translates roughly to "this is a dungeon and you aren't allowed to steal anything until you kill the boss," which begs the dual obvious questions of what do you mean this game has bosses, and did I remember to pack the brown trousers? The second and rather more obvious sign is that the enormous pitch-black void that this giant hole terminates in seems to extend for some substantial distance and is only traversable via rickety-looking wooden set pieces. If the pit and the message weren't clear enough already, this is definitely some sort of boss arena, and I checked, and no, I did not pack the brown trousers, so I take my white-clad derriere and book it straight out of whatever I stumbled across, all the way back up to the surface. I currently have no interest in, expediting my life insurance policy, and the commute to get here was utterly terrible. After an hour or so of wandering, it's time for your first exploration update. Do you remember how I was whinging on about not having a stable source of basalt to do all of my quarrying in? Well, whinge no more, at least about that topic, my dear Goose, because boy howdy have we solved that problem. Whilst running around, I happened across an entire mountain of the stuff, all ready for you to mine to your heart's content. Now sure, yes, it is 7.5 kilometers south of Hulse, and there are arguably 2 to 4 mountain ranges between me and any reasonable attempt at efficient pathing, but those are issues for future Goose to deal with, so in the meantime, I shall enjoy my black stone collection, now with free complimentary obsidian that honestly would look way better than the basalt now that I think about it, and don't you dare get any ideas, Goose. Didn't find any dirt yet, obviously, but the snow is mostly no longer a thing, which I take to be a good sign. Exploration update number 2. Still no dirt, but we did find redwoods. These massive trees are, well, I mean, they're redwoods. They're giant honking big trees with a ton of wood in them. Normally they would be an instant pick for high throughput charcoal production, but they also have a uniquely terrible seed drop rate, to the point that even harvesting the entire tree with shears barely breaks even, so if I do end up logging these suckers at some point, it will be after buying the seeds from traders. The real reason I care about them is that they are a strong indicator that I'm in the right climate for rich soil. I took a look around in the forest a bit and did not find any, but that could very easily be because it's a forest, so I'll keep my fingers crossed. And, third time's the charm, we found it. The stuff is kind of a major pain in the keister to spot, if I'm being honest, and even more so than peat, of which it bears a startling resemblance to, but still, this does prove that I'm not crazy. Much. Mind you, 37 blocks is not exactly what I had in mind when I imagined myself harvesting deposits of rich soil, so I suspect I will be doing this for quite a bit, but it's a whole lot better than the none that I had previously, so I'm not going to mold too aggressively. Correction. I will, in fact, mold aggressively. You see this enormous cliff here? You see how there is no rich soil in it? Yeah, this has been my life for the past 3 hours. My inventory is quite literally 50% seeds by volume, and I have yet to encounter a single other patch of rich soil in all of my searching. I have sunflower seeds and amaranth, folks. I am in a temperate climate with a lot of rain. Where is the dirt? Nowhere to be seen. In fact, had I bothered hunting all of the animals I saw on the way here, I would have made more terra preta from their bones than I could have with the pittance of dirt that I found. Like, I get why it's rare, but people, it's dirt. Come on, it doesn't have to be this rare. So, nothing for it but to keep looking, I guess. I found another deposit of the stuff a few kilometers south, but like before, it was only about half a stack worth, so I guess this is just going to be one of those slow, sloggy grinds. And to make matters worse, this stuff looks identical from the top when it's covered by grass, so there's a very real chance that I'm just walking over thousands of blocks of it without even realizing. That's a fun thought. Finally, after traversing almost 19,000 blocks to the south, I come to the conclusion that I really ought have reached ages ago, which is that while fertile soil might be a nice-to-have thing, it is not common enough or strong enough to justify all the effort spent trying to track it down. I have blown almost 24 hours on exploring at this point and got, what, like a stack of this stuff? There's got to be a better way of doing this. And so, with an entire inventory full of seeds and flint to my name, I pack my bags and start heading home. Despite managing to only bring back a stack of fertile soil, I overall consider my expedition a rousing success, despite its, shall we say, less than successful metrics. Sure, the dirt situation is less than ideal, but on the other hand, I did also bring back 11 stacks of flint, a stack each of onion, carrot, spelt, rye, and turnip seeds, samples of amaranth, sunflower, soybean, and cabbage seeds, and a whopping 9 stacks of flax, which should get my farming situation up and running nicely indeed. In addition, I also scrounged up a stack of bones, a bunch of animal fat, and saplings for the cypress trees I discovered whilst wandering. I even got lucky and stumbled upon a single seed from an extraordinarily lost Mediterranean cypress, which is, I mean, a nice person could say that it's a bit unusually shaped for a tree, but I would say that it looks a little bit more like a shrub someone cut in the shape of a punji stick. They are utterly useless for wood production, but, you know, a sapling is a sapling. Oh, and I also ended up picking like 40 ingots worth of lead in raw ore out of the ground for honestly no reason whatsoever, because when I go backpacking, I like carrying several thousand pounds of raw lead ore in my pockets like a normal person. After some more unremarkable construction work, things once again stall out, this time due to a lack of chalk, which, you will recall, presents something of a logistical problem as the closest supply is a good 5 kilometers away and it is still somehow, despite it being in the middle of March, snowed over to the point where travel has become agonizingly slow. At this point, I feel like I'm too invested to pack up, move south, and set up a new base somewhere more sane, and I really don't want to keep walking for the chalking, so I instead decided to put that steel armor to use and went caving on the off chance that I could expand my teleporter network enough to not need to walk everywhere. My first stop is a cave directly beneath my house that I discovered some time ago and have been unable to explore due to, well, reasons. And bingo, they shoot, they score. Incidental fun factoid for you, full steel armor offers enough flat damage reduction that bronze locusts are physically incapable of harming you. They literally do not have the damage necessary to cause impact flinch or anything. They just do nothing now. They're honestly kind of cute, in a way. I mean, I still have to kill them, of course, because I won't always be in full steel plate, but the thought occurs that it might be possible to kite one home and keep it in a cage as a pet, so that might be a fun project for later. We'll have to see. Anyway, the first and only teleporter that I found in this cave was simultaneously incredible and hilariously inconvenient. Incredible because it is almost directly next door and dumps me some 7,000 blocks due south into an area rich in hematite, which is phenomenal. This thing is exactly what I was looking for, 2 episodes ago. There is, however, the one teensy-tiny little problem that it dumps me quite literally directly underneath the middle of an entire inland sea. Like, you could have not placed the thing in any more of an inconvenient location, because yeah, of course, now I have to figure out a way to build an underwater outpost. Like, that's just not negotiable. Let's just add that project to the docket, shall we? So, first question. How do we get out from the bottom of the world through the vintage story equivalent of the Marianas Trench and to the surface? Turns out, pretty easy. Waterlogging in this game is a lot more aggressive than it is in Minecraft, so I can't exactly slap a door on something and huff that sweet, sweet non-solid block oxygen that spontaneously gets created, but I can build a diving bell-like structure and get the go-go gas that way. Realism be damned, it's my video game, I'll break it if I want to. Despite, now, presumably having a case of the bends bad enough to make silly straws reconsider their career options, I magically suffer none of the deleterious effects of having your internal intestines blown up like a hot air balloon, so now that I know I won't get squished into a vaguely metallic goose pate, the actual construction of a proper escape hatch is as easy as slapping some blocks in the shape of a hollow tube down in the middle of the ocean. I chose to do this with the famously watertight and structurally sound material known as random rocks that I dug out of the ground with some fancy dirt holding them together, also known as cobblestone, because I like to live dangerously, and if the game wants to treat physics as a joke, I might as well be the one laughing. Other fun things discovered this day. Did you know that temporal storms bypass the mob spawning requirements that said mobs have to spawn in air? Yeah, it turns out you can, in fact, infest the ocean with shiny metal demon spiders, and yes, they do know how to swim, despite being made out of a material one would traditionally not consider particularly buoyant. This will no doubt make for some very interesting nightmare fuel later on down the road, and does nothing to improve my thalassophobia, but the good news is that the universal of water-breaking monster AI holds true in vintage story, and they seem to struggle with 3-dimensional movement, so their threat level averages out somewhere in the neighborhood of slightly hostile seaweed. So that's nice. Slight problem. We may be on the surface, which is great, but now we need to be on the surface and not in the middle of an ocean, which requires a boat. And there's this funny thing about sailboats that I learned. They need sails. Can you guess who has 0 fabric with which to construct sails? Yup, that's right, this goose right here. So in the interests of not having to sit around with my thumb up my butt for several more years, let's start working on that. My adventures with fertile soil have, if nothing else, taught me one thing, and that is that fertile soil makes hen's teeth look prolific, so I needed a new plan, and that plan involved beating the problem with a stick. Classic Goose technology. Or, in my case, beating dirt with a stick. Yeah, I'm not really sure where this is going. Anyway, let's see how much of this stuff that we can make. Powdered charcoal is just wood plus time, and if you think compost is a problem, you have clearly not been paying attention, so the limiting factor here is, without a doubt, bone meal. And yeah, I got a bit over 2 stacks. After running out of all of the compost that I had, we maybe need some more of that. Bone meal is definitely going to be a keister in the pain at some point, but it gets a stay of execution for now, largely because I have several barrels of animal bones for no particular reason that I can draw down off of. Meanwhile, teleporter exploration continues to turn up massive W's. This one is buried directly beneath the pyramid of pain and poor life decisions and shoots me directly east, almost slamming me on top of the olivine deposit that I was mining ages ago to supply my refractory bricks needs after several hours of walking. This is admittedly less important now that I have enough bricks to supply a small British empire, but it is still nice to have on hand just because of how far it lets me travel. But wait, there's more! In that cave, there's another teleporter. This one shoots me even further east with a side order of south, which is nice if I ever need to go 10 kilometers to the east for some as of yet incomprehensible reason. For everything else, though, it's not so relevant. But wait, there's still more. Yeah, it turns out that there are quite a lot of these things around if you're willing to actually put in the time to look for them, and I am exceedingly willing to put in the time to look for them. This one also happens to dump me underneath an ocean, right above the mantle of the planet, but unlike the other, there's actually interesting things in the cave nearby, if by interesting you mean eminently lethal. This is with full steel plate armor on, by the way. The stuff is good, but it is not Minecraft levels of good, and that has been made immediately apparent to me by my sudden lack of internal organs. And then there's this teleporter, which shoots me up to the northeast, which is the exact opposite of the direction that I want to go. It's fine, I have functionally infinite free time, not, and can afford to keep playing the roulette wheel of teleporter tech. Also not. I love gambling. And finally, for now, the last one, which finally shoots me out more closer to the chalk vein. This was the entire point of this whole adventure, and ironically, in the time that it took me to locate this sucker, I could probably have made the chalk trip half a dozen times over. As teleporters go, it's not even that good of one, and it maybe halves the total commute time relative to the other one I was using, but seeing as it's, May, I kind of need to get a move on, so I'll take it. Well, I lied. There's one more. It goes super far south, which is convenient, but also irrelevant, and it also spawned me right next to a bunch of bauxite, which would have been nice 5 episodes ago, but is now also irrelevant, so thanks, Vintage Story. Oh. Yeah, in other news, I've started noticing that there appears to be a 3-legged needle giraffe floating across the horizon whenever the air gets a little bit spoopy. That's new. And yes, I did make this observation without consuming any of the funny forest fungus. Thanks for asking. Here's hoping I don't have to deal with that sucker at some point down the line, because something tells me that sharp sticks are not an effective counter to I Can't Believe It's Not the Martian Invasion, Decaying Construction Site Edition. 3 more rounds of chalk extraction and 3 kleptomaniac conquistadors worth of cultural appropriation later, and we now have this, which is, well, it's a massive pain in the butt, is what it is, but we're like halfway done, so I might as well keep going. You remember back when I was first building my greenhouses and I was complaining about how water mechanics encourage space-inefficient greenhouse designs because reason? Well, I found a solution, and the solution is called free real estate, because there's a lot of it and it's free, so I might as well make use of it. Rather than construct my farmland on flat ground, what I can instead do is build a stair-stepping terrace shape with water blocks touching the sides of all of the crops for maximum hydration. This ensures 100% floor coverage, functionally, at the cost of a whole bunch of verticality, but seeing as I had all this sloped glass built up anyway, that's perfectly fine with me. The real caveat is the amount of terra preta I need. You see, I have 12 greenhouses-ish worth of farming space now, and maybe 2/3 of one greenhouse worth of potting soil. These numbers do not match, and I am going to need to rectify this with a vast amount of rot in order to fix that problem, and I have really no good plans for how I'm going to scale production that hard. And now for something completely different, such as taking the time to put aside my barrels of metaphorical salt for barrels of literal salt. Salt, also known as halite, is special. Like an ore, it has spawning conditions and densities that can be picked up with a prospecting pick. Like a stone, it's, a rock that will spawn as kind of an inclusion in other stone types in a couple of different formations determined by where you are at in the world. For my location, that formation is a salt dome, which is a fancy way of saying a large underground brick of the stuff that starts at a boundary between sedimentary and metamorphic stone layers and extends all the way down to the mantle of the world. These are also rather annoying to locate as a result because it's not an ore, it's a stone type, meaning that I get to do a whole lot of strip mining to try and find one. The one saving grace is that since it's a stone and not an ore, I shouldn't have to do too much of this because the formations of it are absolutely massive. Now, salt is a generally useful material to have around. Its main value is as a preservative because it lets you process vegetables, milk, and meats into pickled vegetables, cheese, and salted meat, respectively, each with a substantially improved spoilage rate over their base materials. This also works with hides, which allows you to keep the hides from rotting but still process them later on, but that seems entirely useless unless you somehow have access to salt but none of the materials to soak hides, which does not strike me as likely, but what do I know? Naturally, I care about none of this. I have more food than I know what to do with, no milk to turn into cheese, and my supply of leather could put Hot Topic out of business. I only care about what's in the salt, which is sylvite, an ore that only spawns inside halite rock. With a bit of processing, this stuff lets me make potash, a potent potassium fertilizer that is unique in that it also upgrades the base potassium capacity of any soil it's applied to. Can you guess what kind of plant really likes potassium? That's right, it's flax! We're stacking all the growth speed buffs here, except for the watering can, because even I have limits. So that distraction was nice. Back to work in the chalk mine we go. Which reminds me, I really should show you my chalk mines, because at this point I have single-handedly quarried out like 5 steel pickaxes worth of the stuff, and the end result is essentially me just skinning a mountain and calling it an excavation project. So we have this, which is nice. We also have this, and as you can see, it goes on for a small distance and actually continues up the side and around the mountain range quite a lot, and out of range of the lantern. It also wraps around the mountain too, just in case you thought that wasn't enough. This whole project has been a deeply unpleasant experience, and I just want you to know that. I would not have wished this on my worst enemy. Moving on. The ultimate irony is that while I'm doing this, I found another halite deposit, rendering all of the work I did on my so-called break entirely irrelevant. Now, this is admittedly, in retrospect, hilarious, but in the moment, the feelings I was experiencing definitely trended a little bit more towards the apocalyptically apoplectic dimension of the emotional spectrum. So anyway, with the chalkening well underway, and the salt well and truly stacked as high as I can possibly make it, it's time to turn my attention to another material shortage that I have until now been happily ignoring. Animal fat. And by loose extension, bones, for the terra preta, but mostly it's the fat that I'm worried about, which is why I'm currently hiding in a tree and trapping pigs in a hole. For you see, this is the start of a grand new adventure. Animal husbandry. TLDR, when a mommy animal and a daddy animal love each other very much and also have consumed the requisite amount of appropriate foodstuff, they will make babies. Just like every animal ever, except for all of the ones that don't do that. Boars are somewhat unique in the fact that they are not restricted to having 1 or 2 babies, however, they can have litters up to 6, and this, combined with their high fat content, means that the bulk majority of my new industrial infrastructure is going to be lubed up with an egregious amount of bacon grease, once I have an appropriate supply of bacon with which to grease. For now, that mostly takes the form of dropping pigs in a hole, filling a bunch of large animal troughs with grain, lighting the place up, and spawn-proofing it, because adult pigs are kind of a pain in the butt to move long distances, and I want to get me some babies. Now, the caveat to this is that family planning with your porcine companions is a bit of a long, drawn-out process, so the great swine susurration is probably going to end up as more of a next year kind of thing, leaving me once again with naught to do but beat my head against the rot problem. Berries, you see, are pretty decent for being a free source of rot. The problematic truth with them, however, is that they are incredibly labor-intensive to harvest and process, and as a corollary, I am incredibly lazy, and those two facts tend to not play nicely with one another. A much more palatable option is crop farming. One grain crop produces thereabouts 12 units of grain when harvested, which can be ground and mixed with water into 12 units of dough for 12 units of rot, and vegetables generally produce half their weight in rot on their own, which makes vegetable crops roughly comparable to berries and grain a fair bit better, but without any of the labor costs associated with juicing them all. Of course, crop farming requires somewhere to do crop planting, and well, wouldn't you know it, I have a whole lot of medium fertility soil and real estate to use with only some light development required. After several more days of vigorously banging my head into the side of a mountain under the auspice of construction projects, I finish up the outer walls of the windmill cage, only to find myself left with an even more daunting task of getting the insides operational. To make a long story very, very short, I'm going to need a whole lot of windmills. To make that short story long again, not only am I going to need a whole lot of windmills, I'm going to need a whole lot of windmills in a very compact arrangement, because we want to minimize the amount of non-windmill parts in order to minimize the amount of friction presented by the system. More compaction means more windmill per block of space, but too much compaction means the windmills will lose their sails from colliding with each other, and the trivial solution of stacking them up lengthwise on a single rotor does not work because the devs are confirmed to be anti-fun and they refuse to let me make a windmill conga line for some bogus reason like game balance. Lucky for me, they woefully understated the level of neurocapsaicin I'm prepared to devote to this project, so I have a pretty good alternative lined up. That alternative is gears. Lots and lots and lots of gears. This layer of gearage has 16 large gears on it, each supporting 4 slots for maximum level windmills to operate on. That's woefully insufficient, but that's fine, because between this layer and the current top of my structure is roughly 40 blocks of exceedingly not free real estate, which I plan to fill with another 3 layers of them, for a total capacity of 256 windmills. That is a lot of windmills, and should, by my math, be more than sufficient to stably power a quern at a mechanical advantage of 125 to 1, or for hellhammers at a mechanical advantage of merely 25 to 1, provided we get some good wind. This does come at a cost, though. Each windmill gearage setup requires 16 resin and 8.5 animal fat to build, which is not a material output I can maintain for a non-zero length of time. Just getting what you see built up here has utterly drained my reserves of both, and costed me a pretty penny in steel tools besides. All those oak logs? Yeah, they, also did not come cheap. In an unrelated news, oak is now legally designated extinct in the wild in the 2 forests nearest to my house. No idea how that happened. Global warming just really wrecks the ecosystem, what can I say? Fat, in theory, should slowly end up resolving itself as the porcine singularity starts taking off, but resin is and will continue to be something that I really have no go-to way of mass producing. Resin logs only spawn in on an initial world load, so I can't make more, and the game is sadly lacking in any mechanic that would allow me to move them closer or automate them, leaving me with the single sole and slightly unappealing option of going out and harvesting the stuff by hand. Mind you, it could be a whole lot worse. Unlike, say, hunting, resin logs don't run away from you. Try to claw out your spleen, or have spawning chances measured somewhere between "you've got to be kidding" and "I hate you and want you to die." So I can kind of just do loops through the surrounding environment every once in a while and get a few stacks, which doesn't sound like much because it isn't, but for any normal applications it would be plenty. Speaking of plenty for normal applications, my flax harvest is in, and with the seasons shifting once again back into the unfun months, it's probably cutting the farming season a little bit close for this, but it worked out, so whatever. Between what little stuff I had sitting around from my earlier rounds and all the stuff I got out of this harvest, I'm now sitting at a hair under 1,200 flax seeds, 7.5 stacks of linen fabric, and a small apocalypse of edible grain. By my math, that fabric yield means I only need around 14 more full harvests before my sale demands are met, which is excellent news, but renders solving the resin and animal fat problem even more urgent by comparison, because my pigs have not given birth once yet, so not looking great. This is so concerning, in fact, that I turned my vast intellect upon the problem, determined to find a way around this crippling lack of lard, and much to my astonishment, my hypothetical vast intellect actually responded for once, instead of being a rent-keeping piece of oatmeal that sits like a potato on the top of my neck. And it said to me, lo and behold, the solution is to dig a hole. Now, hear me out here, because much to my astonishment, there is actually a hint of logic to be found in this. What you get from butchering an animal is determined by two things: the natural resources dropped by said animal, and a measure of how large that animal is, called body weight. Most of the animals I hunt down in the wild have low body weight, which dramatically reduces the amount of stuff, including fat, that you can get from them. I can't affect the first, sadly, but I can influence the second by feeding them, say, the several crates of flax that I'm currently letting rot in the open air because it's worth less than dirt. That's kind of what I want to do with the pigs. The problem there is that the pigs seem to be contractually incapable of pooping babies in a reasonable time span, so I need more animals more fatter more quickly until the pigs catch up. So I need wild animals and I need to feed them. Cool, that means I need to catch them and herd them somewhere, which is where the hole comes in. Animals, broadly speaking, are really stupid and ignore things like holes in the ground in favor of either running away from me, or in the case of bears, running at me to try and get a taste of my delicious derriere, and running towards food. See previous statement regarding bears. Instead of escaping or having a goosey dinner, however, with the power of whole, I can instead funnel them into a collection area in industrial quantities, where I can then concentrate them, fatten them up, and harvest them as I wish, all the while with them being prevented from despawning by a lamp in the middle. At least that's the theory. It worked with chickens. I have no idea if I'm going to be running up against a spawn cap by doing this or what, but given the other options involve letting the game run overnight or something else equally obnoxious, I plan on giving this a try first, and will get back to you with my results in the next video. Until then, and for now, thank you, as always, for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.